Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you guys about the big four biomolecules. And these are four major organic compounds that are found in all organisms. So all living things have to have all four of these. We've talked about this before when we talked about the unified definition of life and all the characteristics that all living things must have. So before I get into those, though, I need to also tap into this concept of organic compound. What's important to understand here is that a lot of people, when they read organic, they think that it means all natural, because we talk about organic food as being the kind of food that's grown without unnatural chemical fertilizers, as opposed to natural fertilizers like cow manure or rotating your crops or chopping up leaves, letting them rot into a compost pile, and using the compost. But in reality, in chemistry and in biology, organic actually means simply carbon containing. And the reason why this is important is that carbon has the ability to make long chains, and therefore they're a really flexible building block. So here I've shown a actually relatively short chain of carbons all stuck together, and you could imagine that I could make this much longer if I wanted to, and I could also have stuff branching off of each one of those carbons as well. So think of it as being like an incredibly good Lego block that you could attach just about anything to. Okay, so let's review again what the big four actually are. And so let me just write the big four. And we'll start with the first one, which is carbohydrates. And then we have fats and lipids. And then we have proteins. And lastly, nucleic acids. In this screencast, I'm going to be talking about just the first two, carbohydrates and fats and lipids. And in the following screencast, I'll talk a little bit more about proteins and then very briefly touch on the concept of nucleic acids. All this is just introductory material you're going to see in lab this week. We're going to be building up carbohydrates and fats and lipids and really getting to know them much more in much more detail. So, like I said, let's focus our attention on these dudes. What the? Sorry about that. The carbohydrates. I meant to use that. Much better. And the first thing I want to do when I talk about carbohydrates, let me just move to the next slide, is talk about the functions of carbohydrates. So let me list out some of these functions. Okay, so this includes energy. So what I mean by this is short-term energy to allow your cells to function properly and therefore you to function properly. Structure. And what I mean by this is truly like mechanical structure, something that keeps you upright or allows for a stiff carapace or something like that. And then we have for cell identification. I'm just going to shorthand this ID. You probably want to take a moment to write out identification. And then also, they're going to be involved in hormones. Okay? So just to make sure I reinforce this properly with you, let me just add a couple things here. I'll put in, oh, whoa, hello. That was gigantic. So, there's sugar, it's a familiar carbohydrate. And let's see what else I can find here. Yeah. And then we can have here for cell ID, it's a little harder to understand what's going on here. So let me just sort of circle things up here for you. Right here, whoa, hey, right here, these things right there that I'm circling up, those are actually carbohydrates that help cells to identify themselves as being part of the body, and therefore they shouldn't be attacked by the immune system. Now, carbohydrates have a specific type of building block, and these building blocks in carbohydrates are known as simple sugars. Fortunately, they really aren't that simple. So you'll see they're fairly complex to make. But these building blocks can be arranged in different ways so that we can actually create different types of carbohydrates. So there are 3 different types of carbohydrates that we need to focus on, and I will list these out first. Okay, so we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And saccharide, actually, the word saccharide means sugar, and you all know the root meaning for each one of these prefix. Mono meaning one, di meaning two, and poly meaning many, which is tremendously helpful because in the case of monosaccharides, we're talking about just having a simple sugar all by itself. And an example of that would be sucrose. Okay, I'm an idiot. I didn't mean sucrose. I meant glucose. So there's an example of a glucose, the structural formula of glucose. An example of a disaccharide is indeed sucrose. So let me show you that. Okay, so there's the structural formula for the disaccharide sucrose. And then lastly, I have a set of polysaccharides, which I'll show with this image. This might actually be a little hard to understand, but what we have here, each one of these is a simple sugar, and in fact, specifically, it's a simple sugar of glucose. And depending on how you arrange them, you can make many different polysaccharides. In this case, a whole bunch of glucose is put together like this, makes starch, like this, cellulose, like this, glycogen. Kind of cool. So now let's take a look at an overview of fats and lipids. And also, let's do the same thing. We'll look at the different functions associated with fats and lipids, and let me just list them out. Alright, so we have energy storage, cell membranes. In other words, cell membranes are made up of fats and lipids, vitamin production and storage, and then also they assist in nerve cell transmission. So the signals that nerve cells send to each other and around your body are enhanced by the fats and lipids that help to insulate the transmission. Oh, and I actually forgot one more thing, which is that they are components, put a comma in here, they're components of steroids and hormones. Get that out. Ooh, just fit it in there. Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, so let's look at what are the building blocks for fats and lipids. Again, our building blocks that we had for carbohydrates, if you remember, were simple sugars, whereas our building blocks for fats and lipids are a little bit more variable. We have 2 major things, which are fatty acids and glycerols. Don't call me a fatty acid. Okay, so let's take a look at the different types of fats and lipids. There are actually more than what I'm going to show you here, but we really only need to focus in on 2 types of fatty acids. Let's go back to the black color and types. And the 2 types we're going to be looking at are triglycerides and phospholipids. Let me show you what a triglyceride looks like, and in 2 different ways. Here's a classic, well-known example of a triglyceride, that there is butter. And that frightening structural formula is what that also is butter. So a whole bunch of those molecules make up that butter there to the left. And that picture that I just put in there in the upper left or right hand corner, that actually shows a portion of the cell membrane. And you can see that the cell membrane is made up of these fats called phospholipids, which contain a phosphate head and two lipid tails. This is a little hard to read here to see. So let me just sort of point out here that this is the phosphate head, and this here is one fatty acid tail, and here's another fatty acid tail here, making up the phospholipid. Okay. I think that's all I want to cover right now. Like I said, we're going to be looking at these two major molecules in much more detail in class, and this was simply an overview to give you a sense of the importance of these molecules in our bodies and in the bodies of all living things. Okay, crew, see ya.